For decades, the trajectory of a professional life was predictable. You climbed a rigid corporate ladder, rung by rung. Today, macroeconomic forces, from automation to rapid technological shifts, have fractured that linear path into a chaotic web of unpredictable nodes. Organizational psychologists classify this modern landscape as a VUCA environment: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It is the baseline reality for the global workforce. In this environment, the traditional psychological contract between employer and employee has collapsed. The historical exchange of lifelong loyalty for guaranteed career advancement no longer exists. Without a corporate structure to dictate the path, professional survival requires the individual, not the organization, to assume total ownership of their career trajectory. This necessary psychological adaptation is known as the protean career orientation. Individuals with this mindset are defined by two specific traits: a high degree of self-direction and a reliance on intrinsic work values rather than external rewards. Organizational leaders often view this mindset with suspicion. Many managers equate a highly self-directed, values-driven employee with an inherent flight risk, assuming they lack loyalty and will leave at the first sign of friction. But a comprehensive review of peer-reviewed literature published in the Annual Review of Organizational Psychology and Organizational Behavior reveals a different reality. The empirical data proves the flight risk assumption is entirely false. Understanding what researchers call the protean paradox is essential for modern organizations to accurately identify, harness, and retain top talent. To understand the paradox, we first have to separate the protean mindset from a concept it is often confused with: the boundaryless career. This matrix maps self-direction against mobility. A boundaryless attitude strictly measures geographical mobility, jumping between organizations. The protean orientation moves vertically, driven by intrinsic values, independent of changing employers. This creates the solid citizen archetype: high in protean traits, low in boundaryless mobility. These individuals are fiercely autonomous and insist on managing their own development, yet they remain deeply dedicated to a single firm. Self-direction is a psychological stance regarding how one works, not a physical trajectory of moving from company to company. Maintaining that psychological stance requires a robust internal architecture. We have to look at how a worker forms their professional identity. Developmental psychologist Erik Erikson first formalized the concept of the adolescent identity crisis in the mid-20th century. Erikson theorized that a core stage of human development involves resolving the tension between identity cohesion, knowing exactly who you are, and role confusion. Building on this, researcher James Marcia identified a hazard in this process called identity foreclosure. This occurs when an individual adopts an identity handed down to them, often by authority figures, without actively exploring alternatives. Adults who rely entirely on their job title and corporate affiliation for their sense of self-worth are stepping directly into professional identity foreclosure. When that rigid ladder breaks, their identity shatters with it. Psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton observed an adaptive alternative termed the protean self, a resilient personality holding complex, shifting priorities without losing its core shape. Surviving the modern economy requires a worker to cultivate a deeply internalized value compass, rather than borrowing a fragile identity from their employer. To see how this psychological compass functions in the workplace, researchers mapped the empirical processes of the protean career. This flowchart isolates three meta-competencies. First, identity awareness. When intrinsic values feed into this awareness, they act as a stabilizing anchor, keeping the individual focused despite external turbulence. The second is adaptability, allowing the employee to rapidly shift behaviors and acquire new skills without fracturing their core identity. The third meta-competency is agency. Agency is the capacity to intentionally make things happen. It transforms a reactive survivor enduring market currents into a proactive architect of their career. This translates directly into proactive career behaviors, seeking networking opportunities, requesting critical feedback, and actively upskilling themselves. Awareness, adaptability, and agency are the specific mechanisms that convert an internal attitude into measurable actions. These internal psychological mechanisms directly address management's fear of the self-directed worker. This diagram shows the final causal links. High PCO individuals consistently achieve subjective psychological success, reporting higher well-being, engagement, and job satisfaction. But the benefits extend to the organization. Empirical data demonstrates these employees maintain higher overall task performance than their peers. They display significantly elevated rates of proactive work behavior, tackling problems before management even identifies them. Cross-lagged studies further prove an increase in organizational citizenship behaviors. This means these highly self-directed workers are significantly more likely to support their colleagues and contribute to the firm's broader goals. This culminates in the protean paradox. Employees who are intensely self-directed and prioritize their intrinsic values actually generate the highest levels of affective organizational commitment. Prioritizing individual values does not deplete company value. When channeled correctly, it actively multiplies it. However, this paradox is not an unconditional guarantee. The process operates entirely on a strict boundary condition: person values fit. The environment must support the individual's priorities. When an organizational culture actively violates a protean employee's intrinsic values, the commitment pipeline immediately fractures, diverting straight into turnover intention. Because they are highly adaptable and acutely aware of their own worth, a values violation triggers a swift exit from the firm. Modern organizations cannot control top talent with rigid ladders. They must build autonomy-supportive platforms. By aligning with intrinsic values, the fiercely independent worker becomes the enterprise's most powerful asset.